Welcome to Taiwan Hashtag. This is Ross Feingold coming to you on Storm Media from Taipei. Today we'll be talking about this past Sunday's KMT, Kuomintang Chinese Nationalist Party Congress, where Kaohsiung Mayor Han Kuo-yu was formally anointed as the party's candidate for the 2020 presidential election, which will be held next January. As our viewers know, after a long primary process where the rules were changed midway, as the DPP also did for its primary process, Han Kuo-yu emerged victorious over his nearest competitors, business tycoon Terry Go Taiming and former mayor of New Taipei City, Eric Zhu Li Lun. Now, Han has achieved the formal nomination, which was held by acclamation at the Congress this past Sunday, so it completed the final formality for Han Kuo-yu to be the party's candidate. So what comes next for Mayor Han as the KMT's candidate for the presidential election? We'll be going through some of those things in this program. One of his first priorities will be to pick a vice presidential candidate. So this has been a matter of some speculation. We talked about this on a previous show, whether or not there were some candidates running for president or rumored to be running for president who were doing so simply to be the VP, the vice presidential nominee, for whoever won the KMT nomination. So now that we have a KMT nominee, the focus will be on who will be his running mate. And there's speculation about some of the people who were previously running for the Kuomintang nomination, such as Eric Zhu, Zhu Li Lun, even Go Taiming Terry Go, who is yet to return from his overseas trip after losing the KMT primary. He is in the mix as a rumor nominee. And also former Premier Simon Zhang, Zhang Shanzheng, his name appears frequently as a potential running mate. And then, as we've said in the past, there are probably a lot of people who we haven't even thought of, people who might not be as famous, who might get the nomination as well. And that is not something unheard of here in Taiwan. Taiwan presidential nominees have in the past selected as running mates people who are not always well known to the public. They may have had some role in public life. So, for example, Eric Zhu, when he became the KMT nominee in the 2016 presidential election campaign cycle, so the election was in January, he became the nominee several months before that, replacing the earlier nominee, Hongxiu Zhu. He picked a former minister of labor, again, not somebody who was really well known to the public, but she was a woman, so it gave some gender balance to the campaign ticket, but not somebody very well known, and ultimately it didn't really change the result. And as we've said before, often vice presidential nominees can't really change the calculus of most voters because they're just looking at the top of the ticket. But Han, given all the controversy over how he became a successful candidate for mayor last November, his lack of previous policy experience, questions about his China policies, there's a lot of speculation that maybe this is a situation where he does need to find a candidate who balances out his own personal shortcomings. So what might that be? Well, it could be a focus on a gender balance, as the KMT did last time. The current president, Tsai Ing-wen, she also went for gender balance by picking a man to be her vice presidential candidate. Again, somebody who had some role in public life previously as a doctor, but not somebody who was broadly known to the public. Han might happen to go for somebody who has more of an economic background, keeping in mind that Han did focus on economics as a Kaohsiung candidate, and he's talking about economics again as a presidential candidate. He might go for somebody who has more experience in the business world, in economic policy. Certainly Go Taiming would fit that, given his success as a business executive. He might also pick somebody who just has more experience working in government. That would go to Simon Zhang, Zhang Shanzheng, the former premier, who prior to that was the Minister of Science and Technology under former President Ma. So somebody who's worked as a minister, as a premier, and has vast government experience. And he also brings a lot of business experience, having previously been a technology industry executive for Google. So he also is a very highly regarded potential candidate. Probably not a good idea for Han to go for somebody who looks at or talks exactly like him, so somebody with the same speaking style, somebody with the same lack of broad political or business, industry, commercial experience, would not bring any balance. Maybe he'll go for somebody with geographic balance, somebody from a different part of Taiwan. The problem for Han is he spent a lot of time in his career in Taipei. He's now the mayor of Kaohsiung, so what geographic balance would mean for him remains unclear. Some people will say he should go for what in Taiwan they call a native Taiwanese, so not an Aboriginal, but somebody who speaks Taiwanese dialect, whose family has been in Taiwan for several hundred years, as opposed to somebody like Han, whose family came with the Kuomintang and the nationalist government's retreat at the end of the Civil War. So some people say he should go for that kind of ethnic balance. But it certainly should be priority for Han. The sooner he gets a running mate, the sooner they present a complete ticket and say, look, this is the package that we're presenting to the voters, and it just makes for better messaging. Which brings us to our next point, messaging. This is something that is a priority for Han as well. What kind of messaging does he want to bring to the voters? Does he want to focus on the economic message like he did in his successful run for Kaohsiung Mayor? Or the big question mark about Han, in which he'll be criticized from the media and from the DPP, and we'll talk about that a little later in the program, is his China policy. What is his China policy going to be? Earlier, he was accused of not being strong enough in pushing back on one country, two systems, which Xi Jinping had discussed in his Taiwan policy speech at the beginning of this year. Then Han was walking back from that in a rally. He said, even in English, over my dead body will we have one country, two systems here in Taiwan. Clearly, there's a lot of doubts about his desire to safeguard Taiwan's democracy and its sovereignty versus China. Most likely, he's a traditional KMT candidate. He'll pursue 1992 consensus policies if he is elected, so something similar to what President Ma did for 8 years, which was obviously rejected by voters in 2016 when they decided to go for a DPP candidate rather than a KMT candidate, proposing for more of the same when it comes to China policy. But for Mayor Han, candidate Han, you need a China policy and you need a winning China policy. Right now, you probably don't have one. So that is a big risk for candidate Han, and he needs to address that very, very quickly. And beyond China policy, he needs a broader China vision. Not just a China vision, I'm sorry. He needs a broader policy vision. So what are his policies on economic development? What are his policies on social spending, elder care, child care? These are all issues that President Tsai's government has put a lot of effort to. They've passed a lot of legislation. They've appropriated lots of budgets. They've actually done quite well in implementing these things. Mayor Han, candidate Han, now needs policies on these issues. And it's a full range of domestic policy issues. So if we get away from the China policy issues, we get away from the national security issues, Mayor Han is going to be expected to voice these policies with some detail, but where Mayor Han actually has a strength is not overdoing it. We saw that in the Kaohsiung election last year. He was able to distill policy ideas down to short slogans. So he was known for saying that, if you elect me, we'll all get rich. We'll have money coming into Kaohsiung. And he did it in very short Mandarin phrases that captured the imagination of a majority of the voters, and that's how he got elected by such a large margin last November. So he needs to strike the right balance. He needs to have some policy visions. He can't say, I don't have any policies. Slogans are not going to be enough if you're running for president of the country. He needs more detail, but he needs to avoid overdoing it as well. So that is something to watch. It's a bit of a risk, but he'll be working on that. He did say that he'll have a lot of written policies. That's probably not going to be good enough either. He's going to need to be able to articulate the policies. Maybe he'll have a vice presidential candidate, running mate with him, who will be able to do that. But it's one of the things, along with finding a vice presidential candidate, having a China policy, that he needs to focus on in the coming days and weeks in order to help his candidacy going forward. The polls, we won't get into them today, but they are still very close. They're showing all the declared candidates, Mayor Han, President Tsai, the undeclared candidates like Guo Taiming, Terry Go, Taipei City Mayor Ko-wen-je, they're all still hovering in a similar range, maybe 6 to 8 points separating all of them. We'll be looking at polls later in the summer, but if Mayor Han really wants to catapult himself higher in the polls, he'll need to come up with policy vision as well. There are a few other things that were achieved at this KMT Party Congress that are worth noting for our international audience. The chairman of the party, Woo Dun-hee, has cemented his role as chairman should Han Kuo-yu win the presidency. What does this mean? Well, typically, the chairman is the president. So if there's a KMT president under the party bylaws, then the president will automatically become the chairman as well, until he resigns. And that's what happened to Ma Ying-jeou. Over at the DPP, same thing happened. President Tsai, she was also the chairman of the party until the DPP did poorly in last November's domestic elections. She resigned as well. But the KMT had a bylaw that said the chairman will be the president if there is a KMT president. What happened at the party Congress? They have changed that. So even if there is a KMT president, Wu Dongyi can continue as party chairman, and for Chairman Wu, this allows him to continue to be a stakeholder in party politics, continues to have a voice in national affairs, and given that he was not a popular potential choice for the KMT as a presidential nominee, he at least has a job for now during the campaign, and if the KMT wins, he'll have a job going forward. Other issues that were discussed and voted on or not voted on at the party Congress, the party has decided to not change the process for now of how it selects its at-large legislators. Why was this controversial? A number of the at-large legislators in the Kuomintang, they supported the marriage equality legislation that passed Taiwan's parliament, the Legislative Yuan, in May of this year. There were a lot of people in the grassroots who opposed marriage equality, unfortunately, here in Taiwan, and they were very angry that some of these at-large legislators voted in favor. They're also angry that they say that some of the at-large legislators, we don't see them. They're not running all over Taiwan. They're not doing things for the grassroots. Of course, it's a little difficult when there's a constituency legislator. I don't think they would want the at-large legislator entering their constituency and providing constituent services. But be that as it may, that's what the grassroots are saying. We haven't seen visibility. So they wanted to change the process. The current process is a negative. If you don't like the slate, you're supposed to speak up at a party meeting, the central committee of the party. If you don't like the slate of nominees, you're supposed to speak up. There was a proposal to change that to, we have to affirmatively vote yes on the slate of at-large legislator nominees. That has since been rejected, or at least it wasn't put to a vote. They said, well, we'll make that something to study, but we're not going to vote on it. So not taking action for now on this. The very interesting outcome, given the controversy over marriage equality. We see that it's still unresolved here in Taiwan. And what did the DPP have to say about all of this? Very interesting DPP spokespeople, very talented. They have a team of 4 spokespeople. They're very experienced at dealing with the media, at saying very sarcastic, humorous things that make fun of the KMT. So during his nomination speech, acceptance speech, Han Kuo-yu made a reference to a kung fu movie. He talked about a weapon that he would use to make Taiwan more prosperous. He borrowed the phrase for the weapon that was used in this movie, and the DPP spokesperson said, well, if you use that weapon, actually it might just be a way for China to appear here in Taiwan rather than making Taiwan more prosperous. Excellent comeback by the DPP spokesperson. And that tells us what? It tells us that China policy. We discussed that Han Kuo-yu needs to come up with a China policy, but we see that the DPP are going to make China policy a main focus of their criticisms of Han Kuo-yu going forward as we go into this election campaign. Other issues they've already been talking about in the last couple of days is Kaohsiung governance. So we see the premier of Taiwan, Su Zhenchang, from the DPP, talking about Kaohsiung governance, saying, hey, mayor, you've only been mayor for 4 or 5 months. Here's some problems that you have not solved. You have pollution returning in the Aihe River that cuts through Kaohsiung. There's a problem with dengue fever. They're saying, hey, mayor, you're not even doing a good job on issues of municipal governance. How could you possibly run for president? It could be a very effective talking point if the mayor cannot do something about this. So, Mayor Han, you're going to need to also cover Kaohsiung governance while you're running for president. Big challenge, because the DPP, in addition to criticizing you over China policy, will be criticizing you over events in Kaohsiung. I'm Ross Feingold, and you've been watching Taiwan Hashtag on Storm Media.